For those of you who are new to our organization's events, SOMA is the Seminar Outreach for Minority Advocacy, and we are a fully student-run group whose primary goal is to create a platform for neuroscience scholars from historically underrepresented backgrounds to share both their research and their journeys to their current positions. We hope not only to amplify the voices of these scholars, but also to help bolster the recruitment and successful career advancement of those scholars. By simply looking at the graph on the next slide, if you'll change slides, Rose. There you go. By simply looking at the graph, you can see that the demographics within just our small subdiscipline of neuroscience drastically mismatch the actual distribution of minority communities within the US population. Therefore, we as a group think it is important not only to understand the factors that may contribute to this disparity, but also work to highlight the existing diversity of neuroscientists and recruit and retain the new generations of scientists from all backgrounds and identities. Recruitment of students from historically excluded backgrounds is usually the main focus of most grad and undergrad programs. And while it is a necessary step to changing the landscape of academia to be more representative of the population as a whole, an equally important aim of these diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts should be to retain those scholars from underrepresented backgrounds and identities. Today, we want to ask ourselves, what can we do to help these students not just succeed while pursuing their careers, but also truly thrive and feel accepted in the academy while they are getting their degrees? Inclusion without this equity and support can be incredibly detrimental to any and all students. So that is what led us, SOMA, to the theme of this year's summit, academic retention and success at the undergraduate and graduate levels. And now I'll pass it on to our fellow SOMA member, Jose, who will elaborate a little more about why retention and success are so important for undergrads and graduate students from marginalized backgrounds.
Okay, thank you. All right, there we go. There's my slide. Hello. I'd like to speak how retention programs made for underrepresented students are not only important, but vital for student retention and academic success, while also bringing up a couple of problems that could be improved. I'd like to begin with this study done by Jermaine Jackson, which sampled about 300 students, and it showed students were more likely to continue in school if they enrolled in a retention program as compared to those who did not enroll. And also, students were more likely to graduate if they enrolled in a retention program as compared to those who chose not to enroll. So we see the benefits of having retention programs, not only staying there, but finishing it. So, and there's much more research that highlights not only how important these programs or organizations are, but how vital it is for the retention of these underrepresented students. The payoff of having these programs can be seen by the promotion and retention of said groups. These programs create a designated area where underrepresented students can find others, just like programs create a designated area to find others just like themselves. While also becoming a place for potential mentorship along other students and how they can navigate not only classes, but they could also see role models of their same background. The big incentive of things being possible and ignoring imposter syndrome is going and seeing somebody already completing what one is going to take and instill an idea, wow, these guys actually look like me and they've already done it, so I can do this too. And personally for me, that's been a really big factor going into any of these orgs like SACNAS and SOMA, where I see people of the same background, culturally, everything of that sort, and being like, you know what, it's not that bad. I see somebody's already done it, I can probably catch up too. But among this, we also have people coming together to vent and share hardships that one is experiencing. And one thing I realized is it's coming to terms that it's not only an isolated incident. Everybody always suffers, everybody always goes through these problems, but it's okay, you just gotta keep going. But their overall main goal, or the payoff of these retention programs, isn't just retention and graduation of these URM students, but lining these students up to be professionals, such as becoming professors or deans, or simply seeing yourself in a high-ranking position. But alas, there are some difficulties. Although programs such as MESA, McNair, IMSD are funded allowing designated working people to lead these programs, student-run organizations tend to be volunteer-based. So it relies on other students to take time out of their days while they're trying not only to balance themselves as students and other extracurricular activities, but to create these spaces. But I think the biggest problem of retention, of academic retention, is allyship. I constantly see seminars or workshops for URM students addressing or overcoming problems. But apart from the target audience that you always let is, the seminar is for, you don't really see any one of the 9 minority students or even faculty attending. And if we really wanted to have a deep dive into the retention, we need to know why or what problems are occurring. And if a problem is identified, it's always good to have allies that can be at your corner and say things simple as, I'm not going through this problem, but I can see how it's affecting you. And please let me sign my name in that email, or at least let me stand behind you so you can have the support and they can see that people are backing you up and they're saying it's a problem. Next slide, please. So, okay. All right. But all is not lost. Even though we do have a couple of problems, we see so many programs as well as organizations to help underrepresented students find a designated place with people like them, or that aim at keeping them in success at a successful route, or giving them tools to be successful themselves. I'd like to end this with a few examples of how essential and important these retention programs are, by ending with this study done in 2013, that was done from 2013 to 2019 by Carla Chappelle at a Kentucky community college, that basically showed that if your retention program itself isn't doing a good job at retaining these students, it seems that the university also has a decrease. And her work showed that there was a 3% retention. There was a drop that went down 3% for the retention of underrepresented students. And when they looked at the overall institution itself, it came down to a 9% decrease of URM students. And the last examples I'd like to give is honestly where I'm from. So I came from San Joaquin Delta College, and I was in the MESA program. And it's been shown that this MESA program has a 75% success rate for STEM courses on campus compared to all the campus San Joaquin Delta College students' success rate of 58%. So that's pretty high, from 75% of being in the program to 58% of not being in that program. And in regards to that retention, they show an 86% retention from fall to spring persistence compared to 40% for non-MESA students in STEM. So as you can see, or just by this information, I hope I've instilled this information to say why retention programs and organizations are important. And for a fact, I know that I wouldn't have made it out of even the community college if it weren't for these programs. And I hope we get more insight from our speakers. Thank you.
Great. So now we'll go over some of the community agreements that we'd like to stick to as a SOMA event. We really do want this to be interactive. And after our speakers present, we'll have breakout groups in order to actually foster community and conversation. So these are some of the community agreements that we would like you all to think about and follow as we interact today. And I'll just read off some of the first ones. And to be curious, open, and respectful. To admit that no one knows everything, and together we have unique perspectives that we can bring to the table. We can't be articulate all the time, even when we try. And possibly one of the most important ones is to be present, to really give your attention and your ears and your eyes to the speakers who are sharing out their really important perspectives today. Of course, remember to take care of yourself. Camera off if you need to, and respect confidentiality of what happens in the breakout groups. Those parts will not be recorded, even though this main session is. Stick to using one voice and one mic at a time in the breakout groups. And yeah, just consider the last 3 points as general ways to approach challenging and interesting conversations with the attendees of the SOMA event today. So thank you for coming, and thank you for participating in our community.
Thank you, Sasha. So it's time to go over the agenda, and then I will introduce our first speaker. So this is what we're planning to do today. Of course, we understand that if you need to step out for any reason or you can't stay for the whole event, that's totally okay. We do encourage you, if you do have to leave, to come back around 4:30 because we're going to have a social. But yeah, sorry, next slide. And just to note, the meeting is being recorded, and please keep yourselves muted. And then if you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat box. Okay, so our first speaker today, we're thrilled to announce someone from our own UC Davis community, Dr. Aldrin Gomes. Dr. Gomes is a professor of neurobiology, physiology, and behavior, and of membrane biology. He is the primary investigator of 2 fellowship programs on campus, MARC and IMSD, to support research careers for all students from underrepresented backgrounds. And he is an executive member of the Educational Enrichment and Outreach programs. In 2019, he also received the Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Mentoring Undergraduate Research. Dr. Gomes is committed to increasing diversity and inclusion in several aspects of his work and is a wonderful role model for his mentees. We are lucky to have him speak for us today and look forward to hearing from him. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Aldrin Gomes.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I think I've enabled screen sharing, but let me know if there are any issues.
Yeah, you have to first remove your screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, great, thanks. All right, so I'd like to first start by just asking you all to pull out a phone or your computer and just go on to pollev.com. And you'll be using this throughout the session, so please keep it open so it makes it easy for you. pollev.com, and then go to Aldrin Gomes 419. And this question is just to warm you up. It's what remote work practices are helping you keep sane and motivated in these times?
Sorry, could you repeat the number again? I'm slow. Aldrin Gomes what?
419.
Thank you.
You're not seeing it on the slide? All right, so go ahead and add what you have, what you want. Give another 20 seconds for that. All right. So let's go ahead and see as we get responses. So great. And one thing I want to point out here is notice all the answers are different. It just goes to show diversity, not just in how we look, but diversity in how we think and what we do to relieve stress or to deal with different situations. So I like to start off by first thanking people who allow me to look good and to help me do what I do. And these are Dr. Connie Champagne, who's director of the EEOP, Dr. Barbara Horowitz, who was my mentor and helped me and showed me what to do and some of the finer points, and is still collaborating and helping with these programs. Amy Barlow, who is our resident program evaluator. And every year we evaluate the programs because we want to make sure we're doing something substantial. So we need someone to actually tell us, you're doing it wrong, so we can fix things and make it better. Heather Lawrence, who is in the trenches, who is there every week meeting with students, and we'll show you some of the things that we have to deal with. And mostly Heather is our first interaction with the students to help us detect when something is wrong. We have a specialist in chemistry, Kevin. We also recently got a very decent funding from our dean, Mark Winey. So he's been very supportive, and we have now resources we have never had before, starting last year. And we have our initial, we have someone who's still very involved in this program, Dr. Myrna Villarejo, and she is an emeritus professor, but she founded and launches the BUS program, which I'll discuss a little bit about. We also have a new addition who we hired last year, who is fantastic, Dr. Stephanie Palacio, who's the academic coordinator for IMSD. We never had an academic coordinator for IMSD before. It was just Barbara and myself working with the students. Now we actually have resources. So the good news, we are actually increasing every year the number of underrepresented students coming to UC Davis. And we have more students who are underrepresented coming to UC Davis than most other UC campuses. So that really excites me. But what's the problem? The problem is that Black and Latino or Latina students leave STEM majors at a significantly higher rate than their white peers. There are many studies. I'll just show you one. These are percentage of STEM majors that drop out of the race. And this is over 5,000 students. 13% of white students dropped out. 20% of Latino or Latina students dropped out. And 27% of Black students dropped out. So you see there already, you're looking at a significant number of Black students who drop out over other races. So why do these students drop out? If you look at the literature consistently, these are the top reasons why students leave. It's for financial reasons. They think that the college don't care about them. They have family issues. Some of them it's because of low grades. Some of them don't feel like it's a place to belong, so it's not worth it. Some of them get harassed, so the harassment is too much for them and they leave. And some have unexpected medical problems. Now, some of these things we can't help with. If you have an unexpected medical problem, depending on the problem, there's some cases where we can't help. So we can never get 100% retention. This is another concern that concerns me. If you look at this here, This is the total number of students. And there's 58% females in STEM, sorry, 58% of females in doing undergrad, and 42% are males. But when you look at STEMs, it switches. There are many more males in STEM than females. It doesn't matter what race you look at. What about UC Davis? Under our undergrad enrollment, we are 61% female, 27% URM. This is 2020, our most recent one. 41% first generation, 34% on Pell Grants. So we have a lot of students who are first generation. We have a lot of underrepresented students. What about graduates? It's 17% underrepresented students and 55% female. So it's quite substantial. So if we go back now to your poll, if I were to tell you I met someone called Logan Walsh, what race would you think he is?
Aldrin, I would probably say not black. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. So look at the responses. So 86% said that this person was white. Okay, so let's come back to that. Let's do another one. What about Deshaun Washington? What race is Deshaun? All right, let's have a look. So Deshaun was, wow, 96% African American. So just from the name, we stereotyped these people. Why is that a problem? Because a black name has been shown to be a burden on resumes. You can take identical resumes and just change the name, and that name will affect if that person is called for an interview or hired. This study here is 500 resumes that were taken from an online job, and then they chose a few that they would use, and all they were doing was swapping the names. The resumes were identical. And they submitted these to 1,300 different jobs. What did they find? They found that white names got a callback 1 in every 10 resumes, while black names was 1 in every 15. But if your black name was very specific and clearly associated with black, it got worse. Kirsten's had a callback rate of greater than 13%, but Aisha had a callback rate of only 2.2%. So just by a difference in name, you had a 6-fold difference in chance there. And I don't know about y'all, but I would love a 6-fold higher chance of achieving anything in life. This is just because of your name. This is another study. This is a study in 2016 with it was mostly white adults judging this. And the participants were asked to read 1 of 2 nearly identical stories about the main character who bumped into someone at a bar. And the man angrily responded, "Watch where you're going, a-hole." In one version of the story, the name of the character was either Jamal, Deshaun, or Garnell. In another version, the character was Connor, Watt, or Wyatt, or Garrett. Guess what happened? The study showed that men with black-sounding names were more likely to be imagined as physically large, dangerous, and violent. Violent compared to white-sounding names. How can you get that from a name? But you can, according to some people. So these stereotypes are real. They did the same studies now, and they removed the black names and they put Latino or East Asian sounding names. They found the same thing. Several studies back this up. The names that sound Latino or Black are often subject to discrimination just because of their name. I have a daughter named Jasmine. I did not know Jasmine is one of the top 20 Black names. Think about it. Would you name your kid something that you know will harm her? So the problem, racism in universities is a systemic problem. It is not a series of incidences. The data is very clear about this. Institutions in a large scale are in denial. This was a study in England, and they found that Black students reported the highest rate of racial harassment at 29% versus 9% for whites. Why is this important? Because 1 in 20 students leave school because of this harassment. A study back in 2002 was the first that showed me very clearly that teachers make a big difference. They found that teacher expectations were more predictive of college success than other major factors, such as student motivation and student effort. This blew my mind. When a student saw a teacher believing in them, they did better. When a student showed interest, when a teacher showed interest in that student, the student did better. Unconscious bias is particularly relevant in America today because of this educational achievement gap we have. Now, there are long-standing problems, but many that are not just due to teachers, etc. But many studies have shown that a portion of inequality is happening in American classrooms right now, including classrooms across this country at universities. Even the most dedicated and well-informed teacher holds stereotypes. You saw we just named people based on their names. We classified them. Even the most well-intentioned teachers can affect their students negatively. Black students are nearly 4 times as likely to be suspended as white students, and nearly twice as likely to be expelled. This implicit bias against Blacks starts in preschool. Studies have shown that some teachers in preschool, your kid is only 5, and they're watching that kid because they're more likely to give trouble, because that name is associated with more trouble. Now, if you ask underrepresented students what they feel when they start university, what do you think they will answer? The most common answer I get is they feel alone. They don't see people that look like them. They don't see professors that look like them. They don't see people that talk like them. This is a typical process at a university. You recruit, you admit, we enroll, and we graduate these students. This is what it should be. We should do everything we just did, but very important, we need to retain these students. We need to put in place systems to help these students. Why take a student if you're not going to help them? So for those who are not from UC Davis is actually home to the largest number of biologists on a single campus anywhere in the United States. There's so many PhD level scientists here at UC Davis. We have a wealth of talent. We have 37,581 students, and we confer over 100 graduate degrees. Great university. 50% of our undergrads do undergrad research. By all measures, this is fantastic. One of the programs that we have is the Biology Undergrad Scholars Program, or the BUSP. The overarching aim of this is to increase diversity in the biomedical research force. So this was launched in 1988, and it's a 2-year program to help these students deal with university life and to gain research experience. It's a rigorous program in that we have faculty-mentored research and we form a close peer-peer relationship. So we think it leads to a diverse learning community for students who are interested in science. So how does this translate to helping the student? Let's look at some values. So first of all, 2 years ago, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of this. And these were some of the students who came back to celebrate. They came from all across the country to celebrate this with us. What does this program do? This program increases their GPA. By how much? If you look at Chem 2, the GPA of someone not in the program who is a underrepresented student has a 2.5 GPA. Those in the bus program have a 2.9. With math, it also increased, and the biggest increase was seen for BIS 2 series, from 2.74 to 3.06. If you look very carefully, you'll see in both Chem 2 and BIS 2, the numbers are even above well-represented students. So this shows us, and this is based on 6,496 students here. So it's a large population size. This is we're looking at here because we involve a lot of students. So we know interventions work. So this program consistently achieve higher chemistry, biology, and calculus grades for these students. What about graduation rates? Can anyone tell me what the graduation rate for an average student here at UC Davis? Anyone knows? No, it's not something I paid attention to until I was writing this grant 2 years ago. And I was disappointed to learn that even well-represented students only graduate at 64.5%. I was shocked. You want to guess what non-bus underrepresented students graduate at? 47.4%. Less than half of them graduate. With our intervention, we're able to bring it up beyond well-represented to about 69%. This is why I do what I do. So this program gives higher graduation rates, which to me is more important than a GPA. How many of them are good enough to go on to professional school? That's an important criteria for me, and I would hope also for everyone else, because we want these students to achieve not just a BS degree, but anything they want in life. So how are we doing there? Well represented, 43% of them have the minimum GPA to get into graduate school, as well as other things. Have done research. For non-bust, that's 24.8%. With our interventions, it's 46.1%. So what works? The key thing that we have found over and over is students need a sense of belonging. They need to feel like they are part of a family. How can we do this? The key is the undergrad research experience in my mind. This is what transforms students. A proper undergrad research experience changes a student from someone who has no clue what they're doing to realizing they can be a scientist. They can be anybody they want. This is actual stories from some of our alumni, and this is available on our Humans of Bust online. For the first month, I felt totally alone and isolated at Davis. Again, they feel very alone. This is very common. BUST is a community, but more importantly, it is a family where you can voice your inner struggles and receive true guidance and support. It's a family. That makes a difference. We all want to belong. We all want a family. If you were only child and with no parents, how would you feel? Family is important. This is Cyril, and Cyril said, when he stepped into his first virtual classroom, he was astonished how little variance in people that looked like him in his classes. He felt like he didn't belong. He felt as if he was inferior to all of the other students in his calculus class. Why? Because he felt he didn't belong. None of them looked like him, spoke like him, or understood the culture he came from. When he was introduced to this program, he said he had his doubts. He was not too intrigued about doing extra work and extra courses and having to do extracurricular activities. But now, what does he say? He says, I am nothing but grateful for the way this program set me up for success. BUST will not let you fail if you allow the program to be your crutch throughout this scary journey that is secondary education. For underrepresented students, for most of them, it is a scary journey. This is my lab in summer of 2018. Can you tell which ones are undergrads here? No, we're a family. Everyone is the same. We are here to enjoy life and to do good research and be part of this family. We have another version of this called the BUST Honors Program, and this was funded by part of the IMSD award that I was the PI of, but NIH stopped that in their wisdom last year. But what did we accomplish when we had those funds? So these students get an extra summer where we pay for them because most of them have to work, so they couldn't do research during summer. We take them, we pay for them to do research now in a lab over summer. So they get now not just 10 hours a week, they get 40 hours a week of research in a lab. Do you think that helped them? So it did. 57.1% of those who did that program actually not just qualified, had the minimum GPA, but actually got in and started doing PhD programs. Remember, before, without this extra layer, only 46% had the minimum GPA. That doesn't mean they will get in. The program now that we just got renewed for 5 years, and we got more slots because we fought for it, and we're going to incorporate the IMSD students, undergrads, into there. We now have 10 slots, and some of the faculty on with me here are part of the executive committee who help recruit and select these students. And this program has a similar emphasis, but it's funded by NIH. We want to increase diversity, but the criteria is these students must go on to do a PhD or PhD MD. An MD is not considered successful in this program. That's a limitation of this program, because to me, an underrepresented student becoming an MD is a great outcome. But for this purpose of this grant, it has to be a PhD or MD PhD. So what have we done? Since 2009 to 2020, we had 39 undergrads receive MARC funding. Now, MARC funding is very substantial. It pays their fees and tuition and healthcare and gives them a stipend. So it really helps those who are really struggling. 21 were women, 18 were men, 27 of them were Hispanic, 4 were African American, 3 were American Indians, 3 were Asian, and 2 were white. 21 were from disadvantaged backgrounds, and 2 were disabled. I'm really glad to see we can help disabled students now, and I actively try to recruit disabled students. The retention rate of this program is 94.8%. Remember what it was before in the 60s? So this substantially retains the student. And the mark is heavily research intensive. So this allows students to really do what they want. 60.7% of these students in PhD programs, and a greater percentage of them are in masters or in other research positions that will go on to do their PhD. So the number that actually ends up in the PhD will be quite high. So so not only are we retaining nearly all of these students, about 2/3 of them are going on to do their PhDs. But we're not stopping here. We want to continue and continue and continue. We want these values to continue rising. Now, in Portland school system, one of the best surveys I've seen done is this. When you only read, you only retain 10%. When you hear, 20%. When you see and hear, 50%. But when you see, hear, and do the experience of the research, you retain 70%. And if you can see, hear, experience, and teach, you reach 90%. That is what we're trying to do. We want our students doing it, seeing it, hearing it, experiencing it, and teaching other students. So what works? Providing holistic support services. Our students have unique requirements. They need mental health. They need co-courses. They need their diversity to be celebrated. They don't need microaggressions. They don't need to be told that, oh, you speak well for someone who is Black. They need to be celebrated. Underrepresented students report lower educational aspirations because who they look up to, they don't have those role models. So they don't think, they don't have the dreams that other people have. They're more likely to enter college less prepared. They enter with lower GPAs and take fewer academic hours. They avoid majors and courses in math, science, and humanities because they're told that that is too hard for them. They also face an unfair stereotype about being intellectually inferior. Let's not forget, we actually have 54% of all school-age kids in California right now are students of color. So if we believe they're inferior, we have a big problem. 1 in 8 California students have special education needs. More importantly, 1 in 5 California students lives in poverty. We're the richest state in the world. California would be the 5th biggest economy in the world, and we have 1 in 5 students living in poverty. So let's not forget also that some different groups like Blacks and Hispanics earn a lot less. They cannot afford to send their kids to the best places or have the best experiences or have afternoon special classes to help them. They can't have GRE preps like other students have. These minority and underrepresented. All right, so let's do a quick one now. So what do you think a typical university has students that could be considered homeless? All right, let's see what you all think. 100% true. Wow. I didn't think that until 5 years ago after I got involved. 8% of our African-American students have been described as homeless for at least a few days during their time here, and some for months while at the UC experience. This includes all UCs. 4% whites, 6% Hispanic and Latinx, and 3% Asian and Pacific Islanders. 1% is too much. This is homelessness. How can you even study about grades if you don't have a place to live? Do you think graduate students can be homeless? Yes, 7% of African American graduate students had homelessness. Now, what about food insecurity? Now, here I'm showing very low food insecurity means they go in at least 2 days without food sometimes. 35% of African Americans at the UCs have food insecurity. That is more than 1/3. So if you see 3 African Americans, there's a good chance that one of them is not eating food some days. What about Hispanic and Latinx? It's also very high. It's also high for Asians, for whites. This is too high for any group, but it's especially devastating for the African American group. What about graduate students? 60% of African American graduate students experience food insecurity. Is that shocking to some of you all? So we have a program for graduate students. It's called the IMSD. And this is to train the next generation of underrepresented students. And in this program, one of the key components is we do a bridge program where students come before for 7 weeks, and we pay them like a graduate student, and they get to rotate in a lab for those 7 weeks. So they get to have that research experience without the stress of looking for a house, finding stuff, because a lot of our underrepresented students don't have the money to pay, to do things like wealthier families. So this allows them to bridge that gap and to learn about UC Davis, as well as to learn different techniques, communication skills, experimental design in a family atmosphere, or at least we hope it's a family atmosphere. So how have we done with this? So we had 116 students in this between 2005 and 2019, and the rate of completion for those who completed compared to UC Davis, well represented, it's 83.2%. That's how many graduate students graduate. For non-IMSD underrepresented students, it's 79.8%. So some people look at it and said, oh, it's not bad. I think it's bad. It's bad because everybody, it should be the same rate as everyone else. That should be IMSD. IMSD brought it to 83.3%. So I was disappointed because I thought we can do more. But let's look a little bit deeper. So what are these students actually accomplishing? These students published 252 publications, and they publish in Science, Nature, top journals. They have presented over 350 conferences. And 87% of these students receive different awards. So not only are they doing as well represented now when they come to the program, they are also doing well in publications and with awards. But we want to do more. So the new grant, we have a lot more funding because we were very supported by the university here. I made a passionate plea and they were convinced that we can do more to help our students. So I'm very thankful for them. And we're doing new things we have never done before. I don't have time to go through them, but I will just suggest 3 that I think is really important. We are trying to enhance the mentor-trainee relationship. We really want every mentor to take mentor training. It's difficult, but that's our goal. No one is perfect. I make mistakes, you make mistakes, we all can learn. senior IMSc students are mentoring junior IMSc students. Remember the earlier slide? When you teach, you learn, you retain much more. I learned the most I could when I was a TA. The first year I was horrible. Second year I was good. Third year I was excellent. Because I knew what students would ask. We're also going to publish our success and failures because we want other programs to learn from our mistakes and also benefit. This is one of the things we did this year. We had a one-on-one session with the IMSc students and Michelle Carter. She is the world champion in the shot put, and she spoke about the championship mindset. 6 months before the Olympics, she damaged her foot, and the doctors told her she can't compete. And she said, I'm not listening to y'all. I've been training for years. She rehabilitated herself and ended up winning the gold medal. And her championship mindset revolved around a vision board. Having a vision board you can watch every day to motivate yourself. And I have heard of vision boards before that. But after she said it, I installed one in my room, and I'm 20% more productive now. You can always learn and be better. So what recommendations I have? So first of all, I'm going to ask a simple question. How many different languages you think are spoken in California, and how many different languages you think are spoken in America? Any idea? You can just put it in the chat. All right, see 24, more than 100, 20, 100. All right, good guesses. There's actually more than 220 languages in California, spoken in California, and more than 350 in America. Pretty impressive. So we as faculty must be prepared not only to work culturally and with linguistically diverse students. We must recognize, appreciate, and support this diversity among the students that we serve. Diversity is an asset. We have to recognize that and support it. We need to do more to reduce harassment of protected characteristics. We need to support our diverse students. We need to also support our diverse staff population. When we have staff that look like these students that leave because they've been harassed, that's not helping. We need to improve our mental health in higher education, and this goes for every university. The impact of a student being harassed, when a student has these microaggressions, it weighs on them. They feel like they're inferior, even though tests, when you give the same preparations to Blacks, Hispanics, and whites, they do the same on exams. They feel inferior because they're told they're inferior. We have to let them know they're not inferior. They're as good as anyone else. They're awesome. They're superstars. So what do we do? Help me create an environment here that affirms student strengths and encourages anyone's educational pursuits. We want to make a difference. Help me. Provide the university. I've been asking them and they've been helping. I'm going to continue fighting. They need to provide more opportunities for supplemental education, remedial instruction, and skill development of these students. And as a group, we need to continue to develop measurable goals, because if we can measure it, we can help. We need short and long-term indicators of success. And we really need a database across all of UCs to track the careers of these students so we can see what's working and what's not. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gomes, for an excellent talk. I think it will stimulate some awesome discussion in the upcoming breakout rooms. We did have one question. We don't have too much time for Q&A, but I'll go ahead and read it from Catherine. How can graduate groups / programs recruit, BUSP, and MARC participants?
Oh, great question. So there are many ways. One is we go to different programs, different conferences like ABACAMS and SACNIS, where we actually recruit. So if you have flyers from your graduate group, we are willing to take them and pass them out. We also do emails. I give talks to different Cal States, etc. And at the end, I put names of graduate groups that are especially interested who have reached out to me that allow me to advertise those programs, because the last thing I want to do is advertise a program that's not going to support a student. I want them to be in a family. So I want to know that those graduate programs are going to help these students and let these students feel like they're part of something, because we all want that feeling. But the easiest thing is flyers. Also, I encourage each graduate group to come up with a DEI committee that can actively also look into recruitment. There are many things that can be done, and also to help those that are in the program that are facing difficulties that are unique to them, because financial stress is a major driver with undergrads. The average 40-year underrepresented graduate student has less than $0 in the bank. You cannot be a healthy person with financial stress. You cannot. We started this year teaching financial health. If you start controlling your financial health, you feel so much better about your life, even if it's just $25 a month you're saving.
Thank you. That's a great answer. So I think we'll go ahead and move into the breakout discussions. You can see in the chat that Eden shared 2 documents. So one of them will be with the discussion questions and talking points for everyone to access during the discussion. And then we also have an action items document where people can share, what they talked about in the groups, or if they have any ideas that they'd like to share. And this will be great because we can all access what everyone has put in and kind of look over this on our own time as well. So thank you for putting these up on the screen. We'll go ahead and move these into the document. And just before we get started, I ask that we all respect SOMA guidelines and community rules. You may touch on some sensitive content throughout your group discussion, and it is of the utmost importance that we use these guidelines to keep our spaces safe and comfortable for everyone. Each group will have a moderator equipped with discussion questions, and we encourage you to use these questions, but also explore any other thoughts or questions that may come up during your 20 minutes. So Eden will go ahead and assign everyone to their breakout rooms.
All right, I'm going to put you in the rooms, and then I'm going to make the doc editable so that everyone can then add what they need to. All right, so off into your rooms. I may shuffle people around. It looks like a couple people are bouncing out, coming back in. So sorry in advance if you get ripped from one group into the other.
Ready. Alright, so welcome back from the break. Next up, we are incredibly excited to hear from Dr. Gentry Patrick, who is speaking to us from UC San Diego. In addition to being the director of and a professor of neurobiology in the Division of Biological Sciences, Dr. Patrick is involved with several initiatives supporting the diversity and inclusion of underrepresented scholars. As the Director of Mentorship and Advocacy for this division, he seeks to instill the principles of access, mentorship, and advocacy to create an equitable education infrastructure. as the creator and director of the Pathways to STEM through Enhanced Access and Mentorship program. He works to recruit, retain, and support the success of undergraduates through scholarships, training, and mentorship. He has participated in multiple media formats to spread this message, which I highly recommend you look into. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gentry Patrick.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. Let me share my screen. Do I have, oh, I can share, okay. And, okay. Can you guys see my screen? Yes? Okay. Thank you guys very much for having me. This is a great, I'm really thrilled to be here to discuss with you not only the work that I'm doing here at UC San Diego, but what I believe is really an important topic space to be in to figure out how we do better for promoting STEM for underserved and marginalized communities, because it's not just about providing this access and pathway for individuals, it's really impacting lives and communities as they are conduits to their own communities. So as you can see, the title of my talk is Becoming a Neuroscientist, the Power of Access, Mentorship, and Advocacy. And the way I'll go about this is the following. I will give you briefly a sense of the kind of science we do in the lab, very brief. Then I'll break that up and go through my trajectory and ending up with a bit more of the science that I do. And then tell you about this program that I've started called Pathways to STEM through Enhanced Access and Mentorship and what it's doing here at UC San Diego. I think what's great, following on the heels of Aldrin, Dr. Gomes, that you'll get really the antidote of what can happen if we provide things like access, mentorship, and advocacy for individuals. And I use in part some of the things that have happened to me in my life to describe that. So we're not sure what the complete audience, if it's undergrads or all graduate students, but my lab's interested in synapses. And in particular, we're interested in the molecular makeup of synapses and how they're modified in the brain in response to experience and activity. In particular, we are interested in how protein synthesis and protein degradation is involved in modifications of synapses in the brain. And that may, of course, be important for learning and memory. It's also known that synapses are, in many cases, a point where in disease altered. And so synapse dysfunction is a big thing that people are interested in understanding. My lab has been interested in protein half-life control for many years. And I'll get into that as I tell a bit about my story. Just briefly, one of the big things that my lab has been interested in over the many years, just to give you a sense, in this scanning electron micrograph, we're interested in glutamate receptors, and we're interested in mechanisms which control the recycling and turnover of glutamate receptors, in particular AMPA-type glutamate receptors, whether that be in plasticity events like downscaling or in response to A-beta that you would find in Alzheimer's disease. So, so in general, my lab studies protein degradation at synapses. We use a lot of things such as, mouse models, cultured neurons, biochemistry, imaging, Just to give you a sense here, for instance, if we did some studies to look at how lysosomes traffic in dendrites and visit synapses in response to activity, say if you were to uncage glutamate at a single spine. For us, this was really important, as you'll see later, just tying my work to, we're really interested in understanding how the trash can system, whether that be, for instance, the proteasome or lysosomes, are not just trash cans, they're actually receiving instructive cues by activity. But I'll circle back to that in a bit, and I'll tell you a bit about how I got into science, right? And why a lot of the things that Aldrin spoke about earlier are really important for how we view and move towards really innovating in the space of the STEM and healthcare professions pipeline. And for me, and I'll maybe speak about this at the very end, I really do think that that is a social justice, not just an inclusion issue, it's a social justice and human health issue to solve this problem. Okay, so my academic journey here. So I'm gonna highlight a few things because, you know, it's been a lot of, whether it be luck or serendipity or me figuring out, just staying resilient. A lot of different things went into play, but I'll start by giving you a sense of where I grew up. And that happens to be in South Central LA. So I was born in LA in Watson, and I grew up in Watson Compton. My mother had me at 16 years old. And so I'm aging myself here, but so I grew up in LA, and to this day, LA is Los Angeles, my heart and soul there still. I really hope that one day that the things that I'm doing in San Diego might make its way to Los Angeles to impact the community that I come from. And I think a lot of us have that interest, right? We go to do something special with our lives, whether it be science, medicine, or both, or some aspects of STEM. And we're still connected to our communities. So how do we maintain that connection, and how do we help change access for others coming from those communities? I graduated from King Drew Medical High School. This was in Watts. I thought I wanted to be a doctor. Not that I knew that I could be a doctor when I was in high school, growing up in the 80s in Compton and Watts, but it just so happened that back then they had these magnet schools. I don't think they're called that now. You know, I was a good student. There's a lot of good students. I wouldn't call myself special. I just worked hard and decided that I wanted to go to college. And here's an interesting tidbit. I'm probably sure that most of you would agree that applying to one university when you're ready to go to college is not the best strategy to take. No one told me I needed to save money or that I needed money for my actions. Probably knew that, but it really wasn't on my radar. And so I applied to one school, and again, whether that's serendipity or luck, Berkeley took me. I applied to Berkeley, and I guess if I wouldn't have gotten into Berkeley, I would have done something different, and I don't know if I would have been here today. The Berkeley years were quite tough. When I left LA and went to Berkeley, I literally felt like I was in a different world. Interestingly enough, this was before Prop 209, and there were, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8% African American students on the campus of UC Berkeley. I may be overstating the number, but it was much more than it is now. Since Prop 209, obviously, undergrad, you see a huge decrease in the number of Black and Brown students that enter our UC system. So that's something that people are continuously looking to change. What are some of the reasons that I had a hard time initially at Berkeley? Well, because I was financially unstable, as Aldrin mentioned. And I put this here because after my freshman year of college, I got a summer job, and interestingly enough, I was homeless for 3 weeks, just kind of couch surfing and getting vouchers to stay at random hotels, but from the local government, obviously. But I landed on a little summer job for the Employment Development Department. And you might not know what this is, but for those who are getting unemployment checks, this is a very important organization, because that's what this organization does. Turns out that my job was to give summer jobs to other kind of either high school or young individuals. And turns out that one job came along washing dishes, as opposed to sending someone on that job, I sent myself. And I got the job, and that was literally the beginning of some financial stability for me to be able to focus on my schooling. After my first 2 years of college, I had maybe a 1.9, 2.0, but it was really, really tough to dig myself out of that. And that's something I'll come to later also. But having a job, having some security and food to eat, because I had some amount of money, this began my trajectory of really focusing in on my studies. So after that, I still thought I wanted to go to medical school. And I'm really glad that I didn't, because I love science, and I love doing science in the way that I'm doing it, as running a lab over the many years that I've been at UCSD. So as it shows you here, I did a master's program at UCSF, and it just so happened that Dr. Watson, who I think of as a pioneer and advocate, Dr. John Watson from UCSF, one of the few Black professors there. Back in '94, when I got into this program, they were taking 2 minority students a year and literally putting them in the graduate program. You get a terminal master's, but you started with the same incoming PhD students. And I was not obviously prepared for that, but I quickly acclimated and took the classes and was able to do well. Interestingly enough, a funny story about this is that I literally stayed on the phone with him for an hour to convince him to take me into this program. And to this day, we remain friends. I look up to him he's done so much for our community and for other underserved scientists at UCSF and across the country, of course. But we marvel, like, what if he had not taken me into that program? Okay, so get to UCSF, spend 2 years there, and finish my master's in biochemistry and biophysics. And these are my, and then I get to Harvard and work really hard and finish at the end of '99. And then I go on to do my postdoc at Caltech. And so bring this up here because these were the individuals that were my mentors and advocates during that time. So I joined the lab of Dr. Erin O'Shea. She was a young faculty back in the early '90s at UCSF after leaving Berkeley as a short stint as a postdoc there in Bob Tejan's lab. And that's when I learned real hard work, because Erin, I wouldn't call her a taskmaster, but she definitely wanted to get the most out of you. And I learned what real hard work was. She also was a great mentor and advocate. She's now the president of HHMI. So it was the first, I had never had a lab or PI in that capacity, because I worked in this kind of analytical chemistry lab that entire time. I really never had a undergrad research experience academically. So that was my first one with Erin. Then I went to Harvard and worked with Dr. Li Wei Tsai. She's now the director of Picaros Institute at MIT. And Li Wei, again, was a phenomenal mentor and advocate. Turned out that I also joined her lab when she was maybe 2 or 3 years in, and was able to do some great work there. She's also been a great friend and advocate along my entire career. The last individual here, and you've seen a theme, I had 3 great women scientists in my life that were my mentors and advocate. Dr. Erin Schumann, who was at Caltech. All 3 of these individuals were HHMI investigators, and they've done some tremendous work over their entire careers and still doing that. And she's now, Dr. Schumann is now Max Planck director in Frankfurt. She also was a great mentor and an advocate. I'll tell this one anecdotal story. After my first year as a postdoc in her lab, this was in 2000, I had some work and I delivered that work at SFN and a poster, and I was in the throes of this, a lot of individuals, a lot of activity in this particular row, and got a lot of interest for my poster, and I was just starting to look at what proteasome inhibitors, how they affected synapses, and we had some interesting data. Believe it or not, well, not believe it or not, the way I got into Erin's lab, she's a big local protein synthesis powerhouse back then, and I asked her, could I come work on local protein degradation, and she said yes. But anyway, I gave this poster, and maybe a week after SFN, someone reached out and said, hey, would you come present your postdoc's work? And it just so happened to be in Tokyo. I had never been to Japan. And she's like, no, I can't come. If you want to hear about this, you have to invite Gentry, my postdoc. And so I did. I went, and that was my first time going. I think I was the only Black person at this entire meeting. That was okay, because I've met people that have remained friends and collaborators to this day from that experience. And that was, again, this idea of access and advocacy. She pushed me out of my comfort zone, and also advocated for me to be able to go do this, and that was really, really important. I'll tell this one little scientific serendipitous moment from my work in in Erin O'Shea's lab and with Li Wei Tsai. When I was in Li Wei's lab, we were studying the CDK5 P35 kinase. And this is a very, very important kinase that does a lot of different things, from development and neuronal migration and synapse function, but it's a cyclin-dependent kinase. And so just so happens that it's activated by a non-cyclin protein, and one of which is called P35. And I was very interested in understanding how this protein was regulated. And it turns out, just like other cyclins, it can become autophosphorylated and then ubiquitinated and degraded by the proteasome. After that, we determined that there was a cleavage product of this protein that accumulated in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. And this cleavage product was stable and mislocalized. And this really solidified my interest in protein half-life control in both health and disease. But the connection back to Erin's work was that I just so happened to work on a kinase in Erin's lab called FO85. And there was a study between Brenda Andrews, another kind of cell signaling and cell cycle person from the University of Toronto. Her lab and Li Wei's lab, in collaboration with me and this other individual, we basically showed that CDK5 was the functional homologue of this budding yeast FO85 cyclin-dependent kinase. So again, a moment of serendipity. I got a job, right? And so after 4 years in Erin's lab, I got a job at UC San Diego. Why? Why did I go to UC San Diego? I interviewed several places, And I'm pretty sure the first few places didn't go so well, but UCSD was my last interview. And it was just a great community, but it also went really well. And I'm so glad that I decided to take that job. But I took the job because they gave me a job. I wasn't in this mode of, figuring out how I can get the best package. I was a kid from South Central LA whose mom or family, they still to this day don't know what, the science that I do. They know that I'm happy doing it. And now I had a job as an assistant professor. So here's beautiful La Jolla, and my lab, just to make sure you believe me, is here in the Revelle campus in Pacific Hall, and I've been at UCSD almost 17 years. And many things, it's been the good, the hard, and the continual hard work that we do in both in our lab and outside of our lab, right? I'll say a couple more things about the work that I do. Again, I mentioned that I'm interested in protein half-life control, and one of the things that's driven our work over the years has been the fact that we predicted that the balance of protein synthesis and protein degradation would be regulated itself by activity, and that would be important for aspects of plasticity and modulations of synaptic strength in both health and disease. And so that has been kind of one fundamental aspect about the work that we do. And over the years, we've looked at the trafficking of proteasomes into dendritic spines and the regulation of proteasome activity in response to activity, proteasome activity in response to neuronal activity and plasticity. We've created various models to look, whether it be yeast and in mice, identifying various subunits on the proteasome that we looked at with regards to its role in regulating proteasome function at synapses. And indeed, the great body of work was an important and fantastic body of work was done in collaboration with Karen Zito, Andrew Hamilton, who was a graduate student, had a very nice project and showed that proteasome activity is important for generation of new spines. In the same vein, we started looking at activity-dependent regulation of monomeric ubiquitin homeostasis. So it turns out that the ubiquitin proteasome system that we study, even the availability of ubiquitin is regulated in an activity-dependent fashion. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that my lab has been working on as of recent and continually is the regulation of AMPA-type glutamate receptor trafficking and turnover in health and disease. And as you know, AMPA receptors mediate, as you may know, AMPA receptors mediate fast-acting, the large majority of fast-acting synaptic transmission in the CNS, and therefore there's a lot of studies that people have done over the years to understand how they're recruited and removed from synapses in both health and disease. The ligase that we study, we identified, my lab discovered that these receptors are modified by ubiquitin. Mammalian AMPA receptors are modified by ubiquitin. And recently we've been looking at, again, how the control of this particular pathway may be, how it could be controlled by neuronal activity. And just to highlight that, here's a tagged version of this ligase that's diffused across this dendritic spine, this dendrite here. And if we stimulate, say, with glutamate and glycine, we see that it rapidly traffics to synapses. And that's within minutes. And so there's this common theme that you can recruit the trash can machinery, if you will, in response to neuronal activity. And of lately, we've been also looking at how lysosomes might also be controlled in response to neuronal activity because they mediate the degradation of membrane proteins that have been internalized. And in this case, it's also involving ubiquitin, the ubiquitination of these AMPA receptors. Now I'm gonna see if you get this. I tied this to, I think back a few years ago, I was in DC and New York with the chancellor and some other colleagues that were not in my department, but we were there speaking to donors as well as alumni. And I had this, I tried to make a connection to my childhood, and I'll see if it goes over with you, if it makes sense. So turns out, as you know, I mentioned that I was born and raised in South Central LA. And let's see if this works here. And my very first job as a 15-year-old, I think I was 15 and a half, was washing trash trucks as they came in from being out in the field. And as you know, trash trucks have to go out and pick up the trash. And that was the worst job that I could have, because after 3 weeks, I think I had an eye infection, and I think I quit like within 2 or 3 months. But it was my first job, and it's interesting now that I study, the trafficking of lysosomes or degradation machinery and signaling pathways that would control protein turnover. And so I made this connection. I think it went over well for the audience, but as you see here, waste management, protein degradation machinery travels out to collect the waste. Okay, so since joining UCSD, you have a career. I joined in 2004. I was promoted to associate professor with tenure and made full professor in 2017. And I shared this next slide, because it really does tell a story of, after 17 years, I've trained several graduate students and postdocs and interacted with lots of undergrads and high school students and many, many colleagues across the country. And the question is, how does this happen, right? I always marvel at my career and what has happened and why, and it drives kind of the interest of what I'm doing now. And I'll tell you about that in the second part in just a second. But so how does a kid from Compton, California become a full professor in neurobiology at UC San Diego? And as I alluded to earlier, that would be access, mentorship, and advocacy. And so what I'm going to do is turn to this second part, and which will go pretty fast, to tell you about what I've been doing outside of my lab over the last 3 or 4 years or more. I've always been interested in supporting programs that are there for underserved students in STEM. I feel that there's a talent pool that just has not been tapped into, and there's some reasons why, for instance, students may time themselves out or not persist in STEM majors. And I wanted to create something that could help to solve that, even if for a few, and then be modeled and maybe scaled. And so what I actually, just to give you some context, and it's interesting just to, for me, back in 2015, I had an opportunity to move to UCLA, and it was at the same time where I was feeling like I wasn't doing enough, and I felt like maybe if I went to LA, I could not only do my science, but I could also start to make an impact in a community that I love. And as I mentioned earlier, I still have a lot of love for Los Angeles, but I stayed. And I created this program called Pathways to STEM through Enhanced Access and Mentorship. It was not just me. It took a lot of people to help put this together, and we're still iterating to get it right. So of course, our mission is to increase the number and persistence and success of underrepresented students in STEM. Here are some of our students. These are our P2s. So this is officially a Meyerhoff replication program now. Meyerhoff Scholars Program at University of Maryland, Baltimore County is a premier program that has, I mean, they probably one of the #1 schools that have sent Black African-American students to PhD programs, and was started about 35 years ago. And I remember meeting Freeman Hrabowski, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, who's the president of UMBC, and he said, Gentry, you just need to replicate this program at your school. And interestingly enough, I had already started this program. And just to give you a sense of what I mean by P1 and P2, so the first cohort, which are now rising seniors, they are our P1s, these are our P2s, so they're rising juniors. And these students, the first 2 years, they actually came from San Diego exclusively. Our P3s, who are just finishing their freshman year, come from all over California. And we've just recruited 21 students for our P4 that are actually coming from not only California, but outside of California. So they're right now, they have to be an incoming freshman in STEM. And that's really important because I really do think we have to champion the idea that we have talented students from underserved communities that can, do well in STEM and actually start to change the landscape of what we see on the output of that, workforce development, faculty members, what have you. They must have an exceptional commitment to character, culture, and community. I'll talk a bit about that later on. And we are really interested in championing the underrepresented and under-resourced students, not just from San Diego now, as I mentioned, it's from all over. They get a 4-year scholarship, and actually not just 4 years. If it takes them 5 years, we'll pay for an additional year, and they get $10,000 a year for their, which typically for our students coming from underserved communities fills that gap, that financial gap. So we don't want our students working. We want them working on their coursework and on their STEM identity as research experiences in labs, for instance. This is a holistic program, meaning they get a personalized academic support, pre-matriculation summer bridge, high-touch mentorship, summer research and internship opportunities, and of course, a cohort experience. We were recently able to hire 3 full pro staff to run this program. And there's also graduate advocates. So we have about 4 or 5 graduate advocates that meet with the students once a week. And there's about 5 academic coaches for every subject for all the major subjects in their first 2 years and beyond, so that they can really do well. And I'll talk about that at the very end as an anecdote of our success, because we realize that these students, while they've been accepted into UCSD, and in many cases they were accepted into Berkeley and other places, we were still trying to figure out why some of them would not do well or not persist. And in reality, they didn't trust the system, or they didn't have a sense of belonging. So we had to build that within our own community, if you will, while also paving the way and allowing them to have their own path, kind of clearing the path and making partnerships across the campus for them. And I'll just quickly go through a few of these things here. Let's see. There's a lot of partners involved. As I mentioned, there's a scholarship. They get 4 years of housing guaranteed. There's a sense of belonging and all these other things, right? Academic support, stratified mentorship, peer mentor, as well as faculty mentorship. This takes a lot of coordination. That's why we have so many people involved. Identity exploration, targeted advising, laboratory training. They get laboratory training the first year so that they get a certificate and they can show proof of principle that they're ready to go into labs. And some of our students after their freshman year have actually gone into research lab and competed very well for prestigious research experiences. Lots of partners, right? The way I started this was I kind of went off campus and into the community and found my way to some philanthropic entities, because I felt like UCSD while they're a great partner, it's a big bureaucratic machine. And so just listening to the community and hearing from the philanthropy that we're supporting these, say, nonprofits that were pre-collegiate, you know, because we interact a lot with pre-collegiate programs as we reach out for our next batch of students. Here's just, you know, some of our scholars interacting with philanthropists. So we're really building relationships, and we're building a community, and everyone kind of knows what the goal is. Recently, together with UC Berkeley, Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg gave a significant amount, which has allowed us to hire all the pro staff to run the program. And so we're really fortunate and excited about that, that we were able to partner with them. And so this takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of funds to continue this. And we're going to have to probably build between a $25 and $30 million endowment just to keep bringing in 20 to 30 students a year. But that's the goal. That's the goal that I have. And there's a lot of people who are helping me achieve that goal. I mentioned they must have the commitment to character earlier on, right? So how are they listening to themselves? The commitment to community, how are you listening to others? And the commitment to culture, and how are you, listening broadly? These are things that we really look to instill and foster, so that they're not only driving their own trajectory and their own success, but they're helping each other along the way. I'm almost done here. I know I'm maybe running out of time. So here, I just want to highlight a couple of things. So partnership for student success. If you think about the student here and they interact with philanthropy for our program, community organizations like pre-collegiate, academia, STEM industry, local government, and pre-K-12 education. But our number one partner always has to be the student. So if you think about what success looks like, you put the student first and work backwards, then you can start to think about, you know, what really needs to take place. And I think Aldrin talked with numbers a lot about what has to happen. Here is this kind of like anecdotal model program. We're only at the beginning, and we've only brought in I think we have about 50 scholars in the program right now, and we're still trying to grow, but it's going to take a while. I'm going to let you hear from these students briefly. Tell me if you can hear it.
Hi, my name is Decca Ismail. I'm from East San Diego, specifically the City Heights area.
Hi, my name is Hania Jawahiri. I'm pursuing human biology major at UCSD Marshall College.
Hi, I'm Ronnie Moreno, and I'm a P1 Pass Scholar.
Hi, my name is Beth Corona, and I'm from San Diego, California.
Hi, my name is Rolando, and I'm a visually impaired first-generation college student here at UC San Diego, and I'm interested in studying the intersection between STEM and human behaviors.
My two parents are from Mexico. They immigrated from Mexico to the U.S., and my career goal is to become a pediatrician.
My ultimate goal is to become a chemist, but overall, I would like to bridge a gap between the sciences and public policy.
My future goal is to become a radiologist, and I'm planning for medical school.
You know, future career goal is to be my own personal PI, have my own lab, and do research in neurodegenerative diseases.
The title of a scholar means that you try your best to accomplish your goals. And even though you may confront challenges, you don't give up and you ask for help.
Scholar means to me earning by the hard work you do.
To me, the word scholar means to be a leader and to ask good questions. Through these questions, you can catalyze change in and outside of the classroom.
Somebody who is an activist, somebody who is strong and believes in what they say and cares about the community, and also is caring about bettering themselves and becoming a better person.
You are a role model for your community, for your neighbors, because your neighbors can be students like you who want to apply to college.
Being a scholar to me means not accepting the textbook answer and constantly questioning and constantly looking for solutions or multiple solutions. And being on a campus like UCSD here, there's so much different perspectives and new insights, and you could take that and be innovative.
If I could give you any...
Okay, I'll stop there. And I want to say a couple takeaways, maybe foster some discussion later on, which is one, I love science. I'm a big science nerd, and I think that it's important that we help build the STEM identity of these students that are coming through the pipeline. Access, mentorship, and advocacy are crucial, of course. The student is our #1 partner, and then there's a power in storytelling. And so for me, I really look to see one day how the stories turn out for these individuals. Yeah, so the last thing I added this briefly because I wanted to kind of show an anecdote of success, for instance. And we're just new, right? So we took 10 students our first year, P1s, 11 students our second year, and 15 are for the P3s. We're now taking 21 that'll come in as freshmen. The cumulative GPAs, say in fall, was 2.73 for P1s, 3.2 for P2s, and 3.65. And if I compare just the summer and fall quarters, that would be for the P1s before we had graduate advocates and our own academic coaches, for instance. And again, these are all students who got into UCSD. Just the sheer shock of showing up on campus after that first summer and fall quarter, 2.13, but then we got it better and we iterated and figured some things out, brought in academic coaches and graduate advocates, and really had more of a holistic approach to the way we support our students. 3.03, our P3s at the end of their freshman, at the end of their summer and fall quarters, in this case, 3.65, and that's still staying the same even as we get to the end of this year. So I think we're doing something, it's right, it's taking a lot of effort, but it's worth it. And I think I'll stop there. And I don't know if we're gonna have time for questions now, but yeah, I can stop sharing and we can get back to where we were. Let's see. I can stop sharing.
Great, thanks so much, Dr. Patrick. We, in the interest of time, we ask that everyone put their questions in the chat box. If Dr. Patrick, you'd mind moderating those as we move forward. Thanks so much.
All right, you guys. So for our final speaker for the 2021 SOMA Summit is Dr. Sherry Watkins, who is a research fellow for the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning at American University in Washington, D.C. Dr. Watkins' research focuses on increasing the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics of STEM career attainment for K through 20 students who have been historically underrepresented and marginalized in STEM through scholarships that focus on equity and inclusion. Dr. Watkins is an active member of her science education community and serves as the Secretary of Continental and Diasporic Africa and Science Education, or CCADES, a research interest group BRIG of NARST, a worldwide organization devoted to improving science, learning, and teaching through research. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sherry Watkins.
Hello, everyone. These things can be tricky. So nice to see everyone and to be in community with all of you. Would you allow me to share my screen? Make me a co-host.
You should be able to share your screen. I think everyone has sharing permissions, but let me know if you have any.
Okay. Let me make sure that I can do that. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So welcome everyone. I am so excited and happy to be here in community with all of you. Today, I will be talking about Black men persisting in U.S. science and engineering undergraduate and graduate programs. Before we get started, I just want to thank the SOMA Planning Committee for this invitation to be here with you. This is very important work, and so congratulations to all of you for your efforts. Today I want to just share some details from a project that another co-author and I conducted on Black men in science and engineering. I'm also going to share some of our methodological considerations, a few of the findings, and then we can together in community think about what our commitments should be as we think about helping the students in our science and engineering communities to persist. And I want to thank Dr. Gentry. I think that was a perfect segue for setting me up. So thank you very much. And so when I think about this work, the work about helping students to be retained in higher education and helping students to be academically successful, it makes me think about how I come to this work, right? And I think when we do work around academic retention, especially attending a conference like this, right, where we're talking about retention and success at the undergraduate level, it's important to think about and to reflect on how we come to this work, right? And so in thinking about how I come to this work, I think about racism, right? And ideologies of anti-Blackness and whiteness, right? And how these ideologies impact populations that are on the margins, including, Black populations in disciplines like science and engineering. I think about calls to broaden participation and increase diversity in science and engineering. But then I think about what is the alignment, right, for faculty members of these calls with our teaching, our research, and our service efforts. I also think about advancing research and scholarship focused on communities that are marginalized in science and engineering, right? And how the absence or the presence of research on this population impacts their persisting in these communities. And then I think about myself and my role as a science educator. And I come to this project, Black men persisting in science and engineering. And so myself and my colleague were really interested in understanding kind of like what the literature around Black men who persisted in science and engineering undergraduate and graduate programs look like. So what we did was we took a survey of the literature to kind of understand what the literature was saying, but also to understand where the gaps were in the literature, and then where were there opportunities for us to expand and contribute to the literature as it relates to Black men and them and supporting their persistence in science and engineering graduate and undergraduate communities. And so we had three rationales. We wanted to understand the unique experiences of Black men in science and engineering post-secondary environments. And so when I use the term post-secondary environments, I am talking about both undergraduate and graduate programs. We also wanted to illustrate the connections between persistence, Black men in post-secondary environments, and our role as science educators. And we also wanted to create a resource guide for educators, particularly science educators, that were interested in better supporting the academic successes of Black men in science and engineering communities. And so to do this, we posed two research questions. We wanted to understand what were the current themes that were addressed in the literature around the persistence of Black men in their science and engineering graduate and undergraduate programs. And then we also wanted to pose new questions or identify new questions for educators and researchers from exploring the literature that examined the persistence of this population. And so in the fall of 2019, myself and Dr. Felicia Moore-Mensah, my colleague from Teachers College, Columbia, we did a systematic review of the literature to look and to see again what types of studies were out there around Black men and their persistence in science and engineering undergraduate and graduate programs. And so initially, interesting enough, we as science educators were really just kind of interested in Black men and their persistence in science programs, but there wasn't a lot of literature out there. And so we extended this to include the engineering literature as well. And so what happened is we had a criteria for our participants. We were interested in Black men. We were interested in studies. So for the studies, we were only interested in studies that had Black men as the primary participants. The studies had to focus on science or STEM or engineering, and it had to look at Black men in post-secondary context. So either in graduate school or in undergrad. And the research questions of the studies had to specifically address persistence, retention, or academic successes in science and engineering. And so initially, we wanted to look only at specific science education journals, right? But given our focus on Black men and their persistence, we chose to broaden our search, right? And so we felt like this approach kind of helped us to capture a representative sample of the research that was out there. And so when we started our review, we used the term African American or Black and male in science. And we were able to generate about 1,200 results. And so we looked at two databases that were known to have a substantial amount of information as it relates to education. So we used Education Source and the database ERIC. And so we kept on refining our search because many of the studies that we looked at really had nothing to do with Black men and science and engineering. And so as we continued to refine our search, we came across 10 peer-reviewed journals, which we included in this review of the literature. And there were 15 articles. And so, and these articles spanned across 26 years. And so I want to share with you, these are a list of the journals that the articles came from. And these are the number of articles that were published in each journal. And so once we identified these articles, what we did was we looked at them, we read the articles, and we kind of coded and categorized them based on themes to help us to really understand, what is the literature saying around Black men and their persisting in science and engineering. And so once we did that, we categorized that in terms of themes. And so I'm going to talk to you about those themes. Okay. So one of the interesting things that we find, or before we talk about the themes, is that I particularly wanted to show you the previous slide, and I'm going to go back to that because as you see, there are just 11 journals and 16 articles that look at understanding the experiences of Black men in science and engineering, right? And this is across 26 years, right? And so one of the important things, the first thing that I want to talk about is the findings as it relates to the articles, right? And so one of the things that we found is that still currently, there's still very little or limited scholarly attention that has been devoted to understanding Black men who are persisting in science and engineering undergraduate and graduate programs, right? So if you think about this, right, across 26 years, there are 11 journals, and across these 11 journals, there are 15 articles, right, that are focused on this, right? And so, and when we think about that, of the 11 journals, 8 of those, which is 73%, only had one article that focused on this, right? But the good news, there's good news, right? The good news is that these studies do demonstrate that scholarly attention focused on marginalized populations like Black men is critical to understanding the experiences of marginalized populations like Black men in science and in engineering undergraduate programs, right? And so when we think, even though there is a paucity of literature around this population, right, that this literature base has helped us to understand some of what the challenges, what the opportunities are, what are the strategies that this population uses to persist, you know, in science and engineering. And so that when we think about Black men, and I think the National Science Foundation in 2020 showed that Black men represent 44% of the Black science and engineering graduate student population. So they are outnumbered by Black women. And we think about, so we think about these statistics, right? This is further evidence that, you know, research that specifically focuses on Black men, you know, is warranted. And so the next set of findings that I want to talk about is the themes, right? And so when we reviewed the studies, the 15 studies, they were chunked and categorized into themes. And so what these themes really do is they give us an understanding of, first of all, what is the literature talking about as it relates to Black men. So when you think about Black men and them persisting in science and engineering undergraduate and graduate programs, these are the salient things, right? They are that pre-college science and engineering experiences are important. Relationships with faculty and peers in their science and engineering communities within higher education are important. And that support from science and engineering departments within institutions of higher education are important, right? And so without going into a whole lot of details, you know, I'd be happy to share the link with you of this publication. I think it's just very important to know this is where we are with the literature, you know, as it relates to Black men and their persistence in science and engineering. So what this does is it kind of helps us to, again, understand where we are, but also, you know, helps us to identify some gaps, right, in the literature and maybe where we need to go. And so, you know, and so I'm going to shift here to us really thinking about, you know, what do our commitments need to be, you know, in terms of thinking about, you know, helping our students to persist in our science and engineering undergraduate and graduate communities. And so I have these questions that I would like for us all to think about. And so, you know, as faculty member, as graduate students, as administrators, whatever your role is, you know, I would like for you to think about, you know, what are you committed to doing? You know, we each have a role or play a role in helping our students to persist in our communities, whether that be science and engineering or any other discipline. And so as I'd like to leave you with thinking about these 3 questions, and we may want to save these, or I'm not sure if we want to save these for the breakout rooms, but we can continue dialogue there, right? But I want you to initially begin to think about, you know, as you are wrapping up this semester, because we have most of us have began to wrap up this semester. And as you move into planning for the fall, what will you commit to doing to support the persistence of students in your classroom, right? So we have attended the summit. We heard our first keynote. We just heard Gentry, and now you're hearing myself. What are you committed to doing to supporting the persistence of students in your classroom? I know that there may be people across disciplines, right? And so this is just, persistence is not an issue that is specific to those of us in science and engineering. And so even if you are not in those disciplines, how does persistence look? How are you supporting the students in your classroom? So how are students persisting in your specific discipline? And then the final question that I would like to leave you with is, what advice would you give to faculty interested in supporting students in persisting in science disciplines, or again, in other disciplines? So at this point, I would like to thank you again for this invitation to be in community with you. I am happy to answer any questions here or at the at the breakout room. I'm going to stop sharing at this point.
Okay, great. We actually do have time for Q&A if anyone would like to either unmute or put their questions directly in the chat.
I had a question.
Hi, yes.
So in those studies, what was the population size? Because the number of Blacks in a lot of universities are pretty small. If it's a HBCU, it will be pretty big, but like if you come to certain universities, so what were the numbers in those studies, or so give an idea of how reproducible they may be?
Right. And so, it's interesting that you say that. So they varied, right? That's an interesting question. So it varied, right? Because this study really looked across institution types, right? So there were, in reviewing the literature, there were studies that looked at students at historically Black colleges and universities. There were studies that looked at Black students at urban institutions. And there were studies that looked at students at predominantly white institutions. And so, one of the studies, so they varied, right? So one of the studies looked at, 17 men, right? So another study looked across like a database, right? That was on several programs that were focused on, I think, Black and Latino men in STEM. And so they varied, right? But that's the interesting piece about this, right? Is that, at least for me, is that when you think about, helping students to be academically, like this conference, helping students to be academically successful and to help them, their retention, a lot of us, particularly, scholars, we pull from this work, right? And the fact that there is just a dearth of information around this area, suggests that this may have some impact on their representation, right? And so, yes, I'm not sure if I answered your question there.
Yeah, thank you.
But thank you for posing it, yeah.
If there's a little bit of time, I have a question, but I don't want to step on any toes. And I think Alexa did put a question for Dr. Patrick in the chat. If you wanted to shout that out, if someone wanted to read that out.
Oh, yes.
He answered individually, or he messaged me.
Okay, cool, awesome. So
yes,
I do have a question. You mentioned, or I think, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the slides mentioned pre-college exposure to science and engineering, and I'm just wondering, what does that typically look like? And is there did they look at the duration of it? Because I know that the neuroscience program here tries to do elementary school visits, but that's different schools, a couple of days, and so I'm wondering, is there a requirement, a length requirement for the types of exposure that these students are getting?
I think that's a great question, right? And thank you for posing that. So I will say that one of the salient things is that that students, they need pre-college, that pre-college science and engineering experiences are important, but they're just not important in the pre-college years. They're important at every phase, right? So they're important in the pre-college years, they're important, in the undergraduate years, in the graduate years, and even once you get into your professional career, they're important, right? And so I don't want to, I'm going to speak to your point, but I don't want to not address that point, right? Because I think, one of the things in doing this review is that it's important that people need support at every phase, of their career, K through 20, and the professoriate as well. And oftentimes we don't talk about that, right? Like people make it through K through 12, and then we may think they're okay, or they make it through undergrad, we think they're okay. They make it through their master's program, we think they're okay. They make it through their doc program, we think they're okay. No, people need support at every level, right? And so we don't want to miss that point. Now, to speak specifically to your point about the pre-college experiences, I think one of the things that was really, salient is that, these students, Black men, and I'm, we all need to have people who are vested in us, right? Who are specifically vested in us and making sure that we are successful. And so a lot of the studies that were reviewed, there were people during their pre-college years that were specifically vested in them, right? So it might have been a teacher, their parents, other peers, they were, so encompassed in these pre-college experiences are all of these different, players that were, critical resources for them and really set them up, right? And help them to see themselves, as scientists or engineers, right? And so it ranges, right? And so many of these studies talked about students at the high school level, right? And so this is a very interesting question that you pose, because and I hadn't thought of it myself, but there probably needs to be more research that looks at students at the pre-K level, right? And what does early exposure look like, and how does that really impact one pursuing science and engineering as a field of study or a career aspiration? So that's a great question. Yeah, thank you for posing it. You made me think about something.
Thank you. That was a great answer.
If anyone else has any questions for either Dr. Watkins or Dr. Patrick, please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask away.
Oh yeah, jump in here for Dr. Gentry if you have. I will share the the virtual platform with him.
I will say that I applaud you guys for doing this. This is fantastic, and I loved being here with you. There's a lot of work to do. Yeah, but I can maybe answer one question or something.
Yeah, Dr. Gentry, I see a lot of work I see a lot of alignment there, when you're talking about community and students, and I see a lot of alignment there. So again, kudos to the panel for just making sure that there was a common thread among all of the speakers as well. I'm sorry, someone was talking.
I think Maribel had a question, if you'd like to unmute and ask away.
Yeah, I just have a question for Dr. Patrick. I was wondering if your program also accepts transfer students. It's kind of seeing that if they do, how does that, do the resources for that group kind of differ from your current?
Right, so we're not there yet, but that's where we're headed. We want to create an avenue for transfer students also, because we're 40% of our students are, maybe not 40, but a large percentage of our students are transfer students. And in many cases, they're, amazingly talented, focused individuals coming from underserved populations also. So hopefully we hope to get there one day. I'll make one kind of comment. It seems like this program is a lot of different things, and the only way it works is actually through leveraging partnerships. So that's a whole nother level. But I've had to leverage partnerships in a way that's not duplicative or kind of, but also making sure that those partners get a reciprocal engagement and something out of it also, right? So you got to really sit and think, although we know what we want to accomplish for the result and the impact on the student, you have to do this in this bureaucratic space.
And I feel like that's such a big question we always come back to at these events is how do you make the people care about it? Like, how do you make those that have the power understand how important this is?
I think I'm using for me, the way I've been able to do it is to be an example of both academic excellence and diversity sitting on the same page. If I was probably just a diversity officer, my colleagues would probably not listen to me at the same way. But and that's just the truth. That's just how it works. Not that they all listen to me and agree with me, but at least they listen to me. Right.
Awesome. Okay, so I think if we don't have any more questions, I know you have to leave, Dr. Patrick. It's been an honor having you here. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Also, thank you to Dr. Watson. That was an incredible talk. Really awesome to see somebody sharing their research like that in such a relevant way to what we're here for. So we're actually going to start the breakout groups a little early, if that's fine with everyone. So it's going to be a similar format. The questions are on the doc. I will repost it in the chat, and then I will send y'all off to your respective groups. So bear with me while I post the document again, and then you're off to your groups.
Hand it over to Eden.
Great. So as we mentioned before, the action items doc is editable for all of you, and we will leave that open for the remainder of the day. So it sounds like y'all were having really productive conversations, and that's awesome. So please update the document with any and all of the actionable items that you discussed in your breakout sessions, and we will be distributing that document within the next couple of days to y'all, so you can check it out and see what kind of things that you can work on at all those different levels. Great. Next slide.
Okay, so we're going to be sending out surveys such as ways to improve or what you guys liked in regards to the summit today. We discussed action items, and at the end of the month, we will be having at the CNS, so as a thank you, we're going to be giving gifts this year. So at the end of the month, we will set up shop outside of the Center for Neuroscience, and we'll send out emails about that.
Raisa, I think you were going to close it out. Okay.
Yeah, I was muted, sorry. So just to wrap up, Everyone in the SOMA committee wants to thank our wonderful speakers and our funding source at the Student Recruitment and Retention Center, as well as our partners at the Center for Neuroscience and others on campus. And we especially want to thank all of you for participating in this event. If you want to learn more about our community, follow us on Twitter, join our listserv, and visit our website. Please join us for our seminars and events in the upcoming academic year. We hope to see you in our community. So now we'll transition to the reception and social. We'll drop the link in the chat now. So we hope to see you there. Thanks, everyone.
I think you can end the recording, whoever's recording.
Right.